The original PlayStation is the true home of survival horror that would see many games come to life, setting standards and blueprints that would literally change the face of the games industry forever. While everybody talks about Resident Evil and Silent Hill, there are a lot of other games that were released on the system that often go under the radar, and some of them being equally as good as the mainstream games, but very few ever talk about. And while these games do take elements from those titles, they offer up their own interest and aspects and add their own originality to the experience to make them really stand out. And they're definitely the perfect alternative to any of those games if you're looking for something that's more of the same but yet is different, that is atmospheric, that has a lot of tension, and that genuinely will scare you. There are a lot of games on the PlayStation that will cover all of those aspects and tick all those boxes. So if we look at Galerians, that released in 1999 on the PlayStation, developed by Polygon Magic, this is one of those titles that ticks all those boxes, as it has all of those atmospheric elements, that is set in a somewhat fictional and distant future where you play as a young boy named Rion who discovers he has psychic powers upon waking up from a mental style institute or laboratory, but he suffers with amnesia and is in the process of learning his identity. And he also discovers that he is also humanity's last hope for survival against what are called the Galerians, which is a new race of artificial beings that are genetically enhanced, and their goal is to eradicate and eliminate or replace the human race, if you will. That is all controlled by a main computer element that has taken on a mind of its own under the name of Dorothy, which acts as the mother of all of the Galarians. But Rion, along with his friend Lilia, are the only two that have the capability in order to stop the madness and even to stop Dorothy in its tracks. And this is where the premise of the game will lead, because you'll find out later on in the story how Rion ended up becoming powerful like he has. And a lot of it had to do with his parents, especially with his dad, who was a scientist who ended up being one of the main influences behind this artificial being created. So there's definitely a very interesting story with this that really talks about and dives deep into a lot of hidden narratives and interesting themes that you wouldn't normally see in games of this style. And while it is a survival horror game that plays more like the early Resident Evil games with fixed camera perspectives, pre-rendered backgrounds, uses tank controls, all of the characteristics that you either love or hate about these games, but there's definitely a dark and unnerving atmosphere that surrounds it, because right, you do end up dealing with enemies as you progress, but the enemies aren't always of a monster nature. They can either be machines or other type of artificial creatures, humans even to a degree, but everybody that you deal with has some form of intention. There's always something shady going on, or there's something weird about the scenario that you end up in, and you'll always find out, especially at certain points in the game, the people you end up interacting with are later murdered, and you're left then wondering what caused it, so you then have to try and figure that out. And each chain of events and everybody you interact with has some sort of form of consequence as well, which will further influence the story. So with the combat in the game, you don't essentially use weapons per se, but you have the use of psychic abilities that can act as like almost telekinetic, where you can utilize various elemental kind of things like shock that allow you to use almost like an earthquake style of a thing, where it can manipulate and push items in the environment or people out of the way to knock them out, if you will. You can also use like flame kind of elements to put people on fire. But if you let your powers overload, Rion will start holding his head like as if he's getting a massive headache, but it's all surrounded by like electric or kinetic energy. But anyone or anything that's in the vicinity of him when that happens, they will die instantly, because it puts so much pressure on the person around them that their brain or their mind can't cope with it, and they will literally just drop down for good. So in order to overcome this, he ends up having to take loads of different style of drugs and enhancements in order to keep all of that at bay. But as you go through the game, you will start off in the laboratory which you need to escape, but then you'll also retrace your steps even back as far as Rion's house where he grew up, and you'll have to find and understand the whereabouts of what happened to his parents, which will also lead you to different environments like a hotel. Every port of action leads to somewhere else that you need to go, as there is a lot of hidden clues that you must uncover in order to figure out what you need to do next. When the game was released, it got fairly decent reviews to a degree, but at the same time, it was often overlooked, as people at the time didn't really understand the concept of it, as it was a very different spin on the survival horror genre. But one of its strengths was definitely in its storytelling, as it talks about dark themes and concepts that would not have really been discussed in those times, and a lot of cliches that, again, many ways you can often see it. You'd like to think that you could see it coming, but you didn't expect it at the same time. But the one thing to note about the game is that when we look in terms of the visuals, the pre-rendered backgrounds are visually stunning, and even with the character designs and even the use of the puzzles, there's a lot of intricate values in this game, and not everything is apparent the way that you would expect. There's a lot of thought goes in to try and figure out some of the puzzles in the game that will obviously require you to do a lot of research, exploration, a lot of backtracking, but that's what makes the game even more appealing, is that you really have to be more mindful of your surroundings. Every interaction has something there that will help you to move forward. The game would receive a sequel with Galerians Ash that would release on the PlayStation 2 that would move away from this concept of pre-rendered backgrounds to play from a more of a third-person action-orientated experience. And while it was considered decent, it didn't have the same appeal of the original game. But at the same time, likes of the first game, fans over the years have definitely grown to love this kind of style and even the unique lore behind the series itself. And sometimes that just happens with games of this caliber. Upon the release, because people don't fully understand what's really going on at the time, it does take time for people to fully embrace what's really there in front of them. But there's definitely a lot of cool aspects here, like even the fact is, right, it's a horror themed game. There's a lot of futuristic elements, but even it has a dark, gritty noir theme to it as well, which also adds to the appeal. It managed to culminate all of those aesthetics and do a really good job on it. It's definitely a hidden gem among horror games on the PlayStation. If anything, it's one of the best horror games on the PlayStation, without a doubt. That took a lot of inspiration from games that came before it, but added its own spin on it and proved to be something very different and very unique, and it is definitely worth a try. I remember when I had this, I remember getting it back in the day, and sure, for me, once I seen the game case at the back of it, if I seen anything that looked like Resident Evil, if it had pre-rendered backgrounds, didn't matter what it was, I would give it a go. Now, it's not to say that they're all great. There were some games on the PlayStation that I did play that looked like that style and just ended up not being as good as I would have thought, but they were still playable to a degree. But I will admit, Galerians for me is one of the best examples of survival horror on the PlayStation. It's definitely a hidden gem, and it doesn't get nowhere near the amount of attention or love that it deserves. It's a real hidden masterpiece in all regards to it. It really is a true hidden gem that everybody should try, especially if you're a fan of horror or even this earlier style of horror game. This is definitely one of those titles you have to try. Definitely up there with the best in my opinion. I put a lot of time into this and I really enjoyed the experience. Definitely left me with the sense of, you know what, I enjoyed that, and it was definitely one of those games, and I still find myself going back to it every couple of years because it just is a unique experience, and it definitely will leave an impact on you after you've played it, that's for sure. But regardless of what I think of Galerians, I would love to know your thoughts of the game, and what do you think of it overall? Do you enjoy this style of survival horror concept on the PlayStation? Do you enjoy this classic style of horror more to the point? And were you a fan of this game, or did you even know it existed? So let us know what you think down in the comments below. And if you would like to see more content around other games like this that were also released on the PlayStation, then be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like on the video, and you can also check out a playlist here on the screen that you can see a lot more of those games in action. And as always, keep those gaming memories alive.